They say you never forget the moment your life shatters into 1,000 pieces. For me, it happened at the Grandview Hotel ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glittering overhead, 200 of our closest friends raising champagne glasses, my emerald gown catching the light as my husband of 10 years stood to give his anniversary speech. To my incredible wife, Damien said, his voice echoing through the microphone, "Thank you for your unwavering support." The crowd applauded. I smiled, gracious as always, the successful architect who'd built not just buildings, but this man's entire empire. Then he dropped to one knee. For one breathless second, I thought he was renewing our vows. The room held its breath, cameras ready, until he turned away from me and faced her. Camille. The 28-year-old nurse from his clinic, standing in her tight red dress, wearing a smile that said she'd been waiting for this moment. "Camille," he said, pulling out a ring. "Will you marry me?" The room exploded in gasps. My 15-year-old daughter burst into tears and ran. Guests stared at me, waiting for me to scream, to cry, to collapse. But I'd built skyscrapers from nothing. I knew exactly how to bring one down. I set my champagne glass on the table with steady hands, pulled out my phone, and dialed a single number. "It's time," I whispered. Camille laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. Guess he finally upgraded from old and ugly. 10 minutes later, the hotel entrance doors opened. 10 black limousines rolled up one after another, and when Damien saw who stepped out, he dropped to his knees for a very different reason. What happened next didn't just destroy him, it rebuilt me. Stay until the end, you won't believe what I uncovered. My name is Aaliyah Monroe. I'm 42 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've been one of the most sought-after architects in the city. I've designed concert halls, corporate headquarters, luxury hotels, buildings that people photograph and admire. But on the night of my 10th wedding anniversary, I learned that the most beautiful structures can hide the ugliest foundations. The Grandview Hotel ballroom had never looked more spectacular. I'd personally overseen every detail of our anniversary gala, the cascading floral arrangements of white orchids and roses, the soft golden lighting that made the crystal chandeliers sparkle like stars, the live orchestra positioned perfectly by the marble pillars. 200 guests filled the space, their laughter and conversation creating that particular hum of a successful celebration. Women in designer gowns clinked glasses with men in tailored tuxedos. The champagne flowed endlessly. Photographers moved through the crowd, capturing what everyone believed was a picture-perfect evening. I wore an emerald green gown that I'd sketched myself and had custom-made by a designer friend. The silk hugged my curves in all the right places, and the color brought out the warmth in my dark skin. My hair was swept up in an elegant twist, secured with the diamond hairpin my grandmother had given me on my wedding day. I felt beautiful. More than that, I felt powerful. This was supposed to be our night, a celebration of a decade of marriage, of building a life together, of surviving the challenges that come with balancing 2 demanding careers and raising a teenage daughter. Damien looked handsome in his custom navy suit, his silver cufflinks catching the light as he moved through the crowd. At 45, he was in his prime, a renowned cardiac surgeon whose clinic had become one of the most prestigious in the state. People respected him, admired him, trusted him with their lives, literally. I watched him shake hands with colleagues, accept congratulations from friends, and bask in the attention. I'd always known he enjoyed being the center of things, but I'd loved that confidence in him once. I thought it was ambition. I didn't realize it was narcissism. The dinner service had just concluded, herb-crusted salmon and roasted vegetables that guests raved about when Damien tapped his champagne glass with a fork. The crystal ring echoed through the ballroom and conversations died down. The orchestra softened to background music. All eyes turned to us at the head table. "Good evening, everyone." Damien began, his voice smooth and practiced. He'd always been good at speeches. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this milestone with us. 10 years ago, I married the most incredible woman I'd ever met." I smiled graciously, prepared for the usual anniversary tribute. Around us, guests smiled too, some dabbing at their eyes already. "Aaliyah has been my rock," he continued, and something in his tone made my smile falter slightly. There was a strange flatness to his words, like he was reading from a script he didn't quite believe. She's supported my career, built our home, raised our daughter. She's been unwavering in her support." The pause before unwavering was deliberate. I felt it like a cold finger tracing down my spine. Then Damien set down his champagne glass and stepped away from the table. The crowd murmured with anticipation. Several guests pulled out their phones ready to capture what they assumed would be a romantic vow renewal. He dropped to one knee. My breath caught. For one suspended moment, I actually thought he was about to do something romantic, renew our vows, present me with an anniversary gift, something to justify this public display. Then he turned, not toward me, toward a woman in the crowd. She stood near the back by the bar wearing a tight red dress that left little to the imagination. Camille Rousseau, 28 years old, a nurse from his clinic. I'd met her exactly twice at hospital functions, both times barely registering her existence. She was pretty in that obvious conventional way. Long blonde hair, heavy makeup, curves she knew how to display. But I'd never even suspected. Camille. Damien said, his voice carrying through the now silent ballroom. He pulled a velvet box from his jacket pocket and opened it. Even from where I sat, I could see the diamond catch the light. "Will you marry me?" The world seemed to tilt sideways. Someone gasped, then another. The murmurs spread like wildfire through the crowd, shocked whispers, uncomfortable, shifting the sound of 200 people, realizing they were witnessing something horrible unfold. Camille's face broke into a wide smile. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look uncomfortable. She looked triumphant. "Yes!" she squealed, rushing forward as Damien slipped the ring onto her finger. Then she turned, met my eyes across the ballroom, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Guess he finally upgraded from old and ugly." The room erupted in chaos. Guests turned to each other in shock. Some stood unsure whether to leave or stay. I heard my daughter Maya's voice, a strangled sob, and saw her run from the ballroom, her pink dress disappearing through the doors. My best friend Serena started to stand, her face furious, ready to come to my defense, but I held up one hand, stopping her. Every eye in that ballroom turned to me, waiting for me to scream, to cry, to throw my champagne in his face, to collapse in a puddle of humiliated tears. That's what they expected. That's what Damien expected. That's what Camille wanted. Instead, I picked up my champagne glass and took one final sip, set it down with steady hands, stood slowly smoothing my emerald gown. I looked at Damien, really looked at him, and saw a stranger kneeling there with his mistress. I leaned forward slightly, just enough that the guests at the nearest tables could hear me. "It's time," I whispered. Then I turned and walked out of that ballroom with my head held high, my heels clicking against the marble floor in the sudden, shocked silence. The room fell silent as I walked away, and that was the last time he ever saw me as weak. I drove home that night in complete silence. No music, no tears, just the sound of my breathing and the hum of the engine as I navigated the familiar streets. Maya had texted me from Serena's house. She'd run there after leaving the ballroom, and Serena's husband had picked her up. "I can't see you right now, Mom. I'm so sorry." I texted back that I understood, that I loved her, that none of this was her fault. Then I pulled into our driveway, the house I'd designed from scratch 12 years ago, and sat in the car for 20 minutes staring at the structure I'd created with my own hands and mind. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my entire adult life building things, creating spaces where people could live, work, dream. But somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten to build a life that was truly mine. I was 22 when I got the scholarship to State University's architecture program. My parents had died in a car accident when I was 19, leaving me with nothing but their old Camry and enough life insurance to cover one semester of community college. I'd worked 3 jobs to keep myself afloat, waitressing at a diner from 6 a.m. to noon, tutoring high school students in math in the afternoons, and cleaning office buildings at night. I studied in the stolen hours between shifts, my textbooks spread across diner counters and bus seats. When that scholarship letter arrived, I cried for the first time since my parents' funeral. It felt like a door opening in a wall I'd been throwing myself against for years. Architecture school was brutal. The all-nighters, the ruthless critiques, the pressure to be perfect while everyone around you seemed to have trust funds and connections. I had neither. What I had was hunger, not just for success, but for proof that I could build something lasting in a world that had taken everything from me. I met Damien during my senior year at a coffee shop near campus. He was in his second year of medical school, charming and ambitious, with dreams of becoming a cardiac surgeon. He had that easy confidence that comes from never having worried about money. His family was comfortable, though not wealthy. We started talking about our goals, our fears, our visions for the future. He said he admired my drive, said I inspired him. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. What I didn't realize then was that Damien didn't want a partner. He wanted a foundation, someone to build him up while he reached for the stars. When his financial aid fell through during his 3rd year, I didn't hesitate. I just landed my first major design contract, a boutique hotel renovation. The money was supposed to be my safety net, my cushion, while I built my career. Instead, I wrote a check for $15,000 to cover part of his tuition. "I'll pay you back," he promised. He never did. When he struggled during his residency, exhausted and overwhelmed, I supported us both. I took on extra freelance projects, designed homes on weekends, built Monroe designs from nothing, while he focused on becoming the best surgeon he could be. I designed our first home when we got married, a beautiful 3-bedroom craftsman with exposed beams and floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the morning light. I was so proud of it. Damien told everyone at our housewarming party that I was the most talented woman he'd ever met. But even then, my best friend Serena pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "Girl, you're building everyone's dream but your own. When do you get to be the one reaching for the stars?" I'd laughed it off, told her that marriage was about supporting each other, that my time would come. I should have listened. 3 days after the anniversary disaster, I finally forced myself to go through our financial documents. I'd been avoiding our home office. The space felt contaminated, now filled with memories of planning our life together, reviewing mortgage papers, celebrating promotions. But I needed to understand our financial situation before the divorce proceedings started. I needed to know what I was entitled to, what I'd be fighting for. That's when I found the post-nuptial agreement. It was filed in a folder labeled Estate Planning 2020. 5 years ago. I remembered that time vaguely. Damien had gone through what he called a depression phase. He'd been distant, moody, talking about mortality and legacy. His father had just died of a heart attack, and Damien became obsessed with protecting our family and making sure everything was in order. He'd said we needed to update our estate documents, create a comprehensive plan. His lawyer had drafted everything. I'd signed the papers during one of the worst weeks of my life. Maya had been sick with pneumonia, and I was splitting my time between the hospital and a major project deadline. Damien had brought the documents to me at Maya's bedside, assured me they were just formalities, and I'd signed without reading them carefully. I read them now. The post-nuptial agreement stated that in the event of divorce, all marital assets would be split 50-50. That sounded fair enough until I got to page 3. The definition of marital assets included Monroe Designs, the architecture firm I'd built before I even met Damien, the firm that bore my maiden name, the business I'd created with my own talent, my own connections, my own sleepless nights, and endless work. According to this agreement, he was entitled to half of it. I felt physically ill. The room spun. I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. He'd planned this. 5 years ago, when I was at my most vulnerable, worried sick about our daughter, he'd maneuvered me into signing away half of everything I'd built. The timing wasn't coincidental. The depression wasn't real. He'd been strategizing his exit even then, making sure that when he finally left, he'd take half my empire with him. My hands shook as I reached for my phone and called Serena. She arrived within 30 minutes. Still in her courthouse attire, she was a corporate lawyer at one of the city's top firms. I showed her the post-nup without saying a word. She read it twice, her expression growing darker with each line. Then she looked up at me with fierce determination in her eyes. "There's an infidelity clause," she said, pointing to a paragraph on page 7. "If either party commits adultery during the marriage, this agreement becomes null and void. Aaliyah, do you understand what this means?" I stared at her, my mind racing. It means if we can prove he was having an affair with Camille before that proposal, if we can document it, this whole agreement disappears. You keep everything. He gets whatever the court decides in a standard divorce proceeding. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time in 3 days, but then reality set in. The proposal was public, I said slowly. But that's not proof they were together before. He could claim it was sudden that he fell in love recently. Serena nodded grimly. Which is why we need evidence. Credit card statements showing hotel rooms, restaurants' gifts, phone records, text messages, anything that proves this affair started before the proposal. I spent the next 4 hours going through everything. Our joint credit card statements going back 6 months, his personal card statements that I could access through our shared banking app, his cell phone records. I made notes, highlighted suspicious charges, cross-referenced dates. My hands trembled as I worked, partly from exhaustion, partly from rage, but my jaw remained set. I'd spent 20 years building structures that could withstand earthquakes. I could do this. The evidence was there. Hotels charged when he claimed to be at medical conferences. Jewelry purchases I'd never received. Restaurant charges for two at places we'd never been together. And text messages I'd always had access to his phone because we shared a family plan, but I'd never looked before because I'd trusted him. Now I scrolled through months of messages with Camille, explicit photos planning their future together, laughing about how I was too busy with work to notice anything. They'd built their fantasy on my foundation. Now I had the blueprint to tear it down if I could find the proof before he hid everything. The morning after I finished compiling my evidence, I woke up to 17 notifications on my phone. Instagram tags, Facebook mentions, text messages from concerned friends with screenshots attached. Camille had posted a photo of herself in front of a floor-to-ceiling window, the city skyline visible behind her, wearing what looked like a silk robe that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her left hand was prominently displayed, that diamond ring catching the morning light. The caption read, "Starting my new life with a real man. Sometimes upgrades are necessary." She'd tagged 6 of my business partners and clients in the post. I stared at that photo for a long moment. The penthouse looked familiar. It was in the Meridian Tower, one of the most expensive buildings downtown. I'd designed a restaurant on the ground floor 3 years ago. Those units started at $8,000 a month. Over the next week, Camille's social media became a calculated assault. She posted photos from Celestine, the French restaurant, where Damien and I had celebrated our 5th anniversary. She wore a Valentino dress I recognized from a boutique I frequented. She checked in at the Harbor Yacht Club, where I'd held client meetings for years. Each post was perfectly curated to show me that she was living my life, only better, younger, more vibrant. She made sure I saw everything, tagging locations I loved, brands I wore, even the florist I used for my office. Maya showed me one particularly cruel post where Camille stood in front of my architecture firm's building, captioning it, "Walking past where the old guard works, thank God I'm building something new." The comments were vicious. Some people defended me, but others, people I thought were friends, liked the post, congratulated her, called her brave for following her heart. Damien moved in with her 3 days after the anniversary gala. He didn't come back to our home to pack his things himself. He sent his brother with a moving truck while I was at work taking his clothes, his books, his medical journals. He left his key on the kitchen counter. No note. No explanation beyond what the entire world had already witnessed. I could have crumbled under the weight of this public humiliation. Instead, I called a private investigator named Marcus Webb that Serena recommended. He was a former police detective who now specialized in domestic cases with a reputation for being thorough and discreet. When he arrived at my office, he was exactly what I expected. Late 50s graying hair, tired eyes that had seen too much of humanity's worst behavior. "I need to know everything about Camille Rousseau," I told him. "Not just the affair, everything. Her history, her finances, her patterns. I want to know who I'm really dealing with." Marcus nodded slowly. "In my experience, Mrs. Monroe, when someone's this brazen about their behavior, they're either very stupid or very experienced. Let me find out which one she is." 1 week later, Marcus returned with a file that made my blood run cold. Camille Rousseau wasn't just a mistress, she was a professional predator with a pattern so clear it was almost textbook. Marcus laid out the timeline on my conference table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. In 2016, she'd married Dr. Richard Chen, a successful ophthalmologist in Seattle. The marriage lasted 18 months before Camille filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The settlement was $2 million. Dr. Chen's colleagues said he was never the same afterward. He'd liquidated his retirement accounts and taken out loans to pay her. In 2019, she'd gotten engaged to Dr. Marcus Williams, a plastic surgeon in Portland. They'd planned an elaborate wedding. 3 months before the ceremony, Dr. Williams died in a car accident. Camille was the beneficiary of his life insurance policy, a payout of $1.5 million. Marcus showed me the police report. The accident was ruled exactly that, an accident. But the timing was convenient. In 2022, she'd briefly dated Dr. James Foster here in our city, a married neurologist. That relationship ended abruptly when his wife hired a private investigator and threatened to expose everything. Camille disappeared from his life overnight, no legal action taken, no money exchanged. She'd learned to be more careful. She targets successful doctors, Marcus explained, pointing to the photographs he'd compiled. Men with substantial assets, established careers, often married. She's methodical. She works her way into their lives through their professional circles. She's been a nurse, a pharmaceutical rep, a hospital administrator. Whatever gets her close to her target. And she's never been charged with anything because technically she hasn't broken any laws. The marriages were legal. The settlements were voluntary. The insurance payout was legitimate. I felt sick. So she's just exploiting emotions and getting away with it. That's exactly what she's doing, Marcus said. Your husband is her biggest payday yet. Between his surgical practice, the clinic, and whatever assets you have together, she's looking at potentially millions. But Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled out another folder, this one thicker. When you asked me to investigate her, I started looking at the clinic's finances, public records, insurance filings, that sort of thing. Camille has administrative access to your husband's billing systems. She processes insurance claims and manages accounts receivable. He spread out spreadsheets covered in highlighted numbers. I found irregularities, procedures billed to insurance companies that were never actually performed, medical codes manipulated to maximize reimbursements, fake invoices for equipment that was never purchased. Over the past 18 months, approximately $380,000 has been fraudulently billed and deposited into clinic accounts. My mouth went dry. Embezzlement. Insurance fraud and embezzlement, Marcus corrected. Federal crimes. The money went into the clinic's operating accounts, which means either your husband knew about it and was complicit, or he's been so blinded by this woman that he didn't notice someone systematically stealing from under his nose. Either way, they're both legally liable. If this comes to light, he could lose his medical license. She could face prison time. I sat back in my chair, processing everything. This wasn't a simple affair. This wasn't even just a divorce. This was a woman who had built a career out of destroying successful men, and she'd set her sights on my husband like a heat-seeking missile. And now she was committing crimes that could bring down everything Damien had worked for, everything I'd helped him build. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. He'd chosen this. He'd brought this woman into our lives, into his practice, given her access to everything. But another part of me, the part that had loved him once, that had built a life with him, felt something closer to pity. Camille thought she'd won a man. She didn't realize she'd declared war on the woman who built empires with blueprints and patience. Armed with Marcus's investigation file, I scheduled an emergency meeting with Serena and Catherine Wells, the divorce attorney she'd recommended. Catherine had a reputation for being ruthless in high-asset divorces. She'd represented 3 of the city's wealthiest women in their separations and had never lost a case. Her office occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, all-glass walls and minimalist furniture that screamed power and precision. Catherine reviewed the post-nuptial agreement first, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she made notes in the margins. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob, and the kind of presence that made people sit up straighter when she entered a room. The infidelity clause is solid, she said after 20 minutes of silent reading. "The documented affair, the text messages the hotel charges the timeline you've established. That's more than enough to void this agreement. He won't get a penny of Monroe Designs. In fact, given that you supported him financially during medical school and residency, we could argue for spousal support flowing the other direction." I felt a weight lift off my chest, but Catherine wasn't finished. "There's something else here that's even more interesting," she continued, flipping to the property documents I'd brought. "You designed and own the building where his clinic operates, correct?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Monroe Designs purchased the property 8 years ago. We renovated it specifically for his practice. He leases the space from my company." Catherine's eyes lit up with the gleam of someone who'd just found the winning move in a chess game. "That means as the property owner, you have legal standing to request financial records from any business operating on your premises, particularly if there's suspicion of illegal activity that could affect the property's value or expose you to liability. Given the fraud Marcus uncovered, you have every right to demand a full audit of the clinic's finances." Serena leaned forward, understanding dawning on her face. "Which means Aaliyah gets access to everything. Every transaction, every invoice, every insurance claim." "Exactly," Catherine said. "And once we request that audit, the paper trail becomes part of the legal record. If there's fraud happening, it won't stay hidden. We file the request tomorrow, and I'll personally ensure it's expedited given the criminal implications." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than pain and humiliation. I felt powerful. The architecture firm I'd built, the building I'd designed, the very foundations I'd created, were now the weapons I'd used to dismantle everything Damien and Camille had constructed on top of them. Over the next 3 days, I worked around the clock, pulling together every document Catherine needed. Property deeds showing my ownership of the clinic building, partnership agreements revealing the financial structure of Damien's practice, email correspondence about the lease terms. Every piece of paper became ammunition, every digital file a bullet in the chamber. But late one night, alone in my home office, with the clock showing 2:30 in the morning, I found something I wasn't looking for. A shoebox tucked in the back of our shared filing cabinet behind the tax returns and insurance policies. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in Damien's careful handwriting. Letters he'd sent me during his residency when he was working 100-hour weeks and I was building Monroe Designs. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," one read. "I can't wait to build a life with you, to give you everything you deserve." There were photographs, too, us at our tiny first apartment, laughing over takeout pizza because we couldn't afford anything else. Me in my graduation gown, him kissing my cheek, both of us looking at the camera like we'd conquered the world together. I held one of the photos in my trembling hands, studying the faces of 2 people who no longer existed. That version of Damien, the one who'd written these letters, who'd looked at me like I hung the moon, where had he gone? Had he ever really existed? Or had I built him in my imagination, the same way I built buildings, creating something beautiful out of raw materials and hope? The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Not for who he'd become, but for who I'd believed him to be. For the decade I'd spent loving a man who'd apparently been planning his exit for years. For the trust I'd given so freely, only to have it weaponized against me. That's when Serena found me. She had a key to my house and had gotten worried when I didn't answer her late-night texts. She sat down on the floor beside me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders while I sobbed into her blazer. "Honey, you're grieving," she said softly, rocking me like a child. I pulled back, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. Something shifted inside me in that moment, a gear clicking into place, a foundation settling on bedrock. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm done grieving. Now I want justice, Serena. Justice dressed in diamonds and served on a silver platter." She smiled, then fierce and proud. "That's my girl." The next morning, I did something I should have done weeks ago. I removed my wedding ring, the platinum band with the inscription, "Forever," that now felt like a cruel joke, and placed it in a velvet box at the back of my jewelry drawer. In its place, I slid on my grandmother's emerald ring, the one she'd given me when I graduated from architecture school. "This ring represents your own success," she told me. "Never let anyone make you forget what you've built." I'd worn it every day during my early career, then tucked it away when I got married thinking the wedding ring was more appropriate. Now it felt like coming home. I picked up my phone and texted my assistant, Jennifer. "Clear my schedule for the Monroe Foundation Gala prep. I want everything perfect." Her response came immediately. "Ma'am, that's in 3 weeks. I thought we were canceling since it was planned as your anniversary celebration." I typed back, "We're not canceling anything. Time to reclaim it." I looked at myself in the mirror, really looked. My eyes were still red from crying, but my jaw was set. My grandmother's emerald caught the morning light, sparkling with promise. They took my love for granted. They would never forget my silence, because silence is the sound of a woman building her fortress. Catherine's audit request hit Damien's accountant like a legal avalanche. Within 48 hours, boxes of financial records arrived at her office, years of tax returns, bank statements, business expense reports. I spent an entire weekend reviewing them with Catherine and a forensic accountant she'd brought in. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop: legal fees. $400,000 paid out from our joint account over the past 6 months to a firm specializing in medical malpractice defense. "Why would he need malpractice lawyers?" I asked Catherine. My hands suddenly cold. "He has malpractice insurance. That should cover any claims." Catherine's expression darkened. "Not if the insurance company denies coverage, which they typically do in cases involving gross negligence or intentional misconduct." I immediately contacted our accountant, demanding to know what these payments were for. He was reluctant at first, citing attorney-client privilege, until Catherine reminded him that the money came from a joint account, my money too. Finally, he sent over the case file number. A lawsuit had been filed 8 months ago. Mrs. Lisa Chen versus Dr. Damien Monroe and Monroe Surgical Center. Wrongful death. Her husband, David Chen, had gone in for a routine cardiac catheterization and died on the table. The initial incident report claimed sudden cardiac arrest unpreventable. But Mrs. Chen's attorney had obtained the real medical records through discovery, and they told a different story. Damien had been rushed, distracted, had made critical errors in the procedure. Then he'd falsified the patient records afterward to cover up his negligence. The trial was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks. As the building's owner, I could be named in the lawsuit if Mrs. Chen's attorneys amended their complaint. My property, my potential liability. And Damien had hidden this from me for 8 months, draining our joint account to pay lawyers while I remained completely unaware. But the malpractice case was just the beginning. As I dug deeper into the financial records, patterns emerged that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'd always left the clinic's business operations to Damien. He was the doctor. I was just the landlord. Now I actually looked at the numbers, and nothing made sense. The clinic was billing insurance companies over $4 million annually. For a small practice with 3 exam rooms and 2 surgeons, that seemed extraordinarily high. I started cross-referencing the billing codes with procedure times. A routine consultation billed as a 2-hour comprehensive evaluation. A simple EKG coded as advanced cardiac imaging. Over and over the same pattern procedures, inflated times, exaggerated codes, manipulated to maximize reimbursement. Then I found something even more disturbing. I recognized some of the patient names on the billing records. Margaret Foster, my former assistant's mother. She'd mentioned to me months ago that she'd never actually had the stress test that appeared on her insurance statement from Damien's clinic. I dismissed it as a clerical error. Now I wondered how many other errors there were. I hired a healthcare fraud consultant named Dr. Raymond Park, a former hospital administrator who now testified in federal fraud cases. He spent 3 days analyzing the clinic's billing records, and when he returned to my office, his face was grim. "Mrs. Monroe, this is systematic insurance fraud," he said, laying out spreadsheet after spreadsheet of evidence. Procedures billed but never performed, upcoding to increase reimbursements, phantom patients. This has been going on for at least 18 months, possibly longer. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent billings. My mouth went dry. What should I do? "You need to report this to federal authorities immediately," Dr. Park said, his tone urgent. The FBI, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Insurance Fraud Task Force. If you don't report it, and this comes out another way, you could be considered complicit as the building owner. You could face criminal charges yourself. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about David Chen, about a man who'd trusted Damien with his life and died because of negligence that was then covered up. I thought about all the insurance companies being defrauded, which meant higher premiums for everyone. I thought about patients like Margaret Foster, whose medical records had been falsified without their knowledge. The next morning, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I tracked down Lisa Chen's address through public records and drove to her home in a modest neighborhood 30 minutes outside the city. When she opened the door, I saw a woman in her late 30s, exhausted and defeated, with 3 young children visible behind her. "Mrs. Chen," I said, "my name is Aaliyah Monroe. I'm Damien Monroe's wife. Can we talk?" She invited me in, though her expression was guarded. Her living room was filled with medical bills stacked on the coffee table. She'd been drowning in debt from the hospital's attempts to save her husband, and now she was fighting Damien's lawyers, who were claiming David's death was his own fault due to pre-existing conditions. She showed me photos of David, a smiling man in his early 40s, playing with his kids coaching soccer. "He was healthy," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He went in for a routine procedure. Your husband killed him and then lied about it." I sat there in that living room surrounded by this family's grief and financial ruin, and something fundamental shifted inside me. This wasn't about my marriage anymore. This wasn't about hurt feelings or public humiliation or even stolen money. Damien hadn't just betrayed me, he'd destroyed innocent lives and felt no remorse. I left Lisa Chen's house and drove directly to the FBI field office downtown. I submitted everything anonymously through their online tip line, the billing fraud, the malpractice cover-up, Camille's embezzlement. Within 48 hours, I received confirmation that an investigation had been opened. Then I called Jennifer and told her to spare no expense on the Monroe Foundation Gala. We were going to make it the event of the year. We were going to invite everyone, the media, business leaders, Damien's colleagues, everyone who'd witnessed my humiliation at the anniversary party. And I was going to make sure they all witnessed his fall. He'd hidden bodies under his success. I was about to dig them all up, and the world was watching. The night of the Monroe Foundation Gala arrived 3 months after my world had shattered in that same hotel ballroom. Jennifer had transformed the Grandview's Grand Hall into something extraordinary. The theme was Women Building Futures. And every detail reflected strength and rebirth. White orchids cascaded from ceiling installations I'd designed myself. Projected onto the walls were architectural blueprints of buildings I'd created, overlaid with quotes from women who'd overcome adversity. The guest list had swelled to 300 people, business leaders, city council members, state politicians, journalists from every major outlet, and dozens of women entrepreneurs I'd mentored over the years. I'd spent weeks designing my gown, sketching and re-sketching until it was perfect. White silk that flowed like water with a structured bodice that spoke of strength rather than fragility. I wore my grandmother's emerald ring and matching earrings. My hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased the diamond necklace I'd bought for myself the week before, not with Damien's money, but with my own earnings from a major commercial project I'd just closed. When I looked in the mirror before leaving my house, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked powerful, untouchable, ready. Maya came with me wearing a dress we'd picked out together. Our relationship had been healing slowly over the past months. She'd returned home after 2 weeks at Serena's, and we'd started family therapy. She was learning that strength didn't mean the absence of pain, and I was learning to let her see my vulnerability. Tonight, she squeezed my hand in the car and said, "Mom, you look like a queen." When I entered the ballroom, the room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire room rose in a standing ovation. I felt tears prick my eyes, but held them back. This was my moment, not for crying, but for reclaiming everything I'd lost, and more. The dinner was magnificent, a menu I'd personally selected with the hotel's chef. Between courses, I mingled with guests who approached me with words of support, admiration, and respect. The mayor herself told me I was an inspiration. A state senator asked if I'd consider joining her Women's Economic Empowerment Task Force. Journalists requested exclusive interviews. The narrative had shifted so completely from that horrible anniversary night, I was no longer the humiliated wife. I was the woman who'd built an empire and refused to let anyone tear it down. When it came time for my keynote speech, I walked to the podium with steady steps. The room quieted. Camera flashes lit up like stars. 3 months ago, I stood in a room very much like this one. I began, my voice clear and strong. I thought I was celebrating a decade of partnership, of building a life with someone I loved. Instead, I learned a painful lesson about trust, about sacrifice, and about the difference between who people appear to be and who they really are. I paused, letting my words settle over the crowd. But tonight isn't about that betrayal. Tonight is about what we build after everything falls apart. It's about integrity. It's about justice. It's about ensuring that the foundations we create can withstand any storm. Then I delivered the blow I'd been planning for weeks. Tonight, I'm announcing that the Monroe Foundation is pledging $500,000 to the Chen family in memory of David Chen, a devoted husband and father who deserved better medical care than he received. The crowd gasped. Camera flashes intensified. I continued, my voice unwavering. David Chen died 8 months ago during a routine procedure that should have been safe. His widow Lisa is here with us tonight. I gestured to where Lisa sat, tears streaming down her face, her 3 children beside her. The cameras swiveled toward her, capturing her grief and gratitude. To every patient who has trusted a medical professional and been failed, I said, looking directly into the news cameras, your voices deserve to be heard. Your suffering deserves acknowledgement. And those who harm others through negligence and deception deserve accountability. The applause was thunderous. I saw journalists typing frantically on their phones. The speech would be on every news outlet within the hour. Across town in Camille's overpriced penthouse, Damien sat frozen on the couch, watching the live coverage on the local news channel. His phone was already ringing his lawyer, his clinic partners, his colleagues, but he couldn't move. Camille stood behind him, her face pale as she realized what was happening. "That bitch," Camille hissed, grabbing her own phone. She pulled up Instagram and typed furiously, "Some people buy love with money," followed by a nail polish emoji. She hit post before Damien could stop her. Within minutes, the comments section exploded, but not in her favor. People called her classless, cruel, heartless. They defended me with a ferocity that surprised even me. Someone created a hashtag #Woman of Integrity, another justice for Chen. Both were trending within an hour. "Do something!" Camille shrieked at Damien. "She's destroying you! Call your lawyer, sue her something." But Damien's phone was ringing again. This time, it was his lawyer, and his face went from pale to gray as he listened. "The FBI," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They want to talk about billing practices when—" Camille's face drained of all color. She slowly sank onto the couch beside him, understanding washing over her like ice water. Her embezzlement, the fraudulent claims she'd processed, everything she'd hidden was about to come to light. I watched the news coverage from the gala's VIP lounge, Serena beside me, with champagne in hand. My phone buzzed with notifications, messages of support, interview requests, business opportunities. Maya sat on my other side, scrolling through the social media reactions with a smile. They'd had fame for 15 minutes. I had power for a lifetime, and they were about to feel the difference when I made the call. 2 weeks after my gala, Damien and Camille made their move to reclaim the narrative. They sent out invitations to what they called a business celebration dinner at Hotel Lumiere, one of the city's most exclusive venues. It was transparently their engagement party, though they'd dressed it up with corporate language to make it seem legitimate. 80 guests were invited, his remaining investors' medical colleagues who hadn't yet distanced themselves, society figures who thrived on drama. The invitation promised an evening of new beginnings and looking toward the future. Serena showed me her invitation with disgust. Several of my business acquaintances had received them too. "They're trying to bury your gala with their own spectacle," she said, "making it look like they're unbothered still on top." I smiled. Let them have their party. The night arrived, and according to the sources I'd cultivated among the hotel staff, Camille had spared no expense. She wore a custom Marchesa gown worth $50,000, I knew, because the designer's social media had featured it. The dress was covered in crystals and featured a dramatic train, the kind of gown that screamed desperation for attention. Her ring caught every light in the room. Damien stood beside her in a Tom Ford tuxedo, playing the role of successful doctor and devoted fiancé, though those who looked closely could see the strain around his eyes, the forced quality of his smile. They made a toast to the assembled guests about leaving negativity behind and embracing their future together. Camille laughed too loudly at Damien's jokes. He kept checking his phone nervously, though he tried to hide it. The FBI had been circling for days, and he knew it. But tonight, they were pretending everything was perfect. I arrived at 8:30, exactly when I'd planned. I wore an emerald green power suit that I'd commissioned specifically for this moment, tailored to perfection, with sharp lines that meant business. My grandmother's ring sparkled on my finger. I walked through the hotel lobby with my head high, my heels clicking against the marble with the rhythm of inevitability. When I entered the private dining room, conversations stopped, like someone had cut the power. Heads turned. Damien's face went pale. Camille's eyes widened, then narrowed with fury. "Security!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. "Remove this woman! She's not welcome here. This is a private event." 2 security guards started moving toward me, but I remained perfectly still, my hands folded calmly in front of me. "I'm not here for long," I said, my voice cutting through the shocked silence. Camille stepped forward, emboldened by the presence of her guests and the expensive dress that made her feel invincible. "Still pretending to be relevant, Aaliyah? He chose me. We're building a life together. Get over it and move on with whatever's left of yours." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Damien put a hand on Camille's arm as if to quiet her, but she shook him off. I simply smiled, reached into my clutch, and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I'd programmed that morning, held it to my ear, and said 3 words, "Send them in." For 5 seconds, nothing happened. The room held its breath. Camille laughed nervously. "What kind of dramatic nonsense?" Then the main entrance doors opened. The first people through were 3 FBI agents in dark suits, their badges visible on their belts. They walked with purpose directly toward Damien. "Dr. Damien Monroe," the lead agent said loud enough for everyone to hear, "we have subpoenas for your clinic's financial records and need you to come with us for questioning regarding insurance fraud allegations." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Damien's face turned from pale to gray. Before he could respond, the doors opened again. 2 IRS investigators entered next, carrying briefcases and official documents. "We also have warrants related to tax fraud and unreported income," one announced. The doors opened a 3rd time, medical board officials in professional attire holding folders stamped with official seals. "Dr. Monroe, we're here to serve notice of immediate license suspension pending investigation into malpractice allegations and falsification of medical records." Guests started pulling out their phones, but they didn't need to. The doors opened again, and news crews flooded in with cameras and bright lights already broadcasting live. I'd tipped them off an hour earlier about a major story breaking at Hotel Lumiere. Then came the moment I'd orchestrated most carefully. Lisa Chen entered, flanked by 3 other families, all victims of Damien's negligence or fraud. They carried photographs of their loved ones, holding them up like silent testimony. Lisa's children clutched pictures of their father. Another widow held a portrait of her husband who'd died after a botched surgery. A 3rd family displayed photos of their mother who'd been overcharged for unnecessary procedures. The room erupted in chaos. Guests scattered, trying to distance themselves from Damien and Camille. Investors grabbed their coats. Colleagues pretended they'd never really known him well. The cameras captured everything: the FBI agents surrounding Damien, the medical board officials reading charges, the families holding their photos, with tears streaming down their faces. I walked calmly to the center of the room, and somehow my voice carried over the chaos. "I believe in justice," I said, looking directly into the news cameras. Tonight, the world will see the truth about the man who built his success on other people's suffering. Damien stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like he was drowning. Camille tried to run, heading for the back exit, but security blocked her path, not to keep me out, but to keep her in. The FBI wanted to question her too. One of the agents approached me, nodding respectfully. "Mrs. Monroe, thank you for your cooperation with the investigation. Your evidence was crucial." The cameras captured that too. My vindication played out in real time on live television. As I turned to leave, I looked back once at the ruins of their celebration. Damien had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Camille was screaming at the FBI agents, her $50,000 dress suddenly looking costume-like under the harsh camera lights. Guests fled like rats from a sinking ship, and when those doors opened, his entire empire walked out on him, but that was just the beginning of his fall. I watched from across the room as the FBI agents placed Damien's laptop into an evidence bag and confiscated Camille's phone right off the table where she'd been taking selfies an hour earlier. The lead agent handed Damien a subpoena requiring him to produce all clinic financial records dating back 3 years. Another agent did the same with Camille, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the document. Within an hour, federal investigators had descended on the clinic itself, boxing up files, imaging computers, interviewing staff members who looked terrified about their own potential liability. By morning, every bank account associated with Damien or the clinic was frozen pending the investigation. His personal accounts, business accounts, even the joint account we still technically shared, all locked down by federal order. He couldn't access a penny. The medical board's suspension was immediate and public, citing the severity of the malpractice allegations and the ongoing criminal investigation. The letter they served him stated clearly Dr. Damien Monroe was prohibited from practicing medicine, prescribing medication, or even entering a medical facility in any professional capacity until further notice. His 3 clinic partners held an emergency meeting the next morning. I knew because one of them, Dr. Patricia Williams, called me personally. "Aaliyah, we had no idea about any of this," she said, her voice tight with stress. "We've voted unanimously to remove Damien from the partnership and rebrand the practice. We're cooperating fully with investigators. I just wanted you to know that some of us are decent people who were deceived too." Within 48 hours, his entire professional network collapsed like dominoes. Investors who'd backed his expansion plans withdrew their funding, citing the reputational damage and legal liability. The hospital where he held privileges revoked them immediately. Medical conferences canceled his speaking engagements. His name was stripped from the research papers he'd co-authored. Colleagues who'd praised him publicly now claimed they'd always had concerns privately. The speed of his fall was breathtaking, but nothing compared to what happened when the FBI's forensic accountants dug into Camille's activities. They'd initially focused on Damien, but it quickly became clear that Camille had been running her own criminal enterprise through the clinic's billing system. She had administrative access that allowed her to submit insurance claims, and she'd used it to create a sophisticated fraud scheme. Fake invoices for medical equipment that was never purchased. Phantom procedures billed to insurance companies for patients who'd never set foot in the clinic. Kickback arrangements with medical suppliers who paid her under the table for steering business their way. The paper trail was damning. Over 18 months, she'd processed $380,000 in fraudulent claims. The FBI traced the money to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, then back through wire transfers that paid for her condo down payment, her luxury car, the designer clothes and jewelry she flaunted on social media. Every material thing she'd used to taunt me had been purchased with stolen money. The confrontation happened in the hotel's security office, where the FBI had set up a temporary command center. I wasn't there personally, but one of the agents I'd been cooperating with described it to me later. Camille had tried to blame everything on Damien, sobbing hysterically and claiming he'd threatened her job if she didn't help him. "He made me do it," she'd screamed. "He said if I didn't process those claims, he'd fire me and ruin my nursing career." Then the agent calmly pulled out printed messages Camille had sent to a friend, laughing about how easy it was to make money off rich idiots who don't check their bills. Messages where she'd bragged about her offshore account and joked about retirement by 40. messages where she'd called Damien her golden goose and discussed how much she could extract from him before moving on to her next target. Camille's face had gone from red with fury to white with terror. They arrested her on-site, handcuffing her in that ridiculous crystal-covered dress and perp walking her through the hotel lobby while news cameras captured every second. Insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering. The charges kept mounting. The footage from Hotel Lumiere went viral within hours. By the next morning, the doctor, the mistress, and the FBI was trending on every social media platform. News outlets ran the story on loop. The dramatic confrontation, the families holding photos of their loved ones, Camille's arrest, Damien's stunned face. International news picked it up. It became a cautionary tale about arrogance and karma shared millions of times across the internet. Reporters camped outside my office requesting interviews. I declined all of them, except for one statement released through Catherine. Justice takes time, but it's inevitable. I trusted someone who betrayed not just me, but countless patients and their families. I only regret not seeing the signs sooner and acting faster to protect the innocent. Public opinion polls conducted by local news stations showed 89% of respondents supported me, with only 4% supporting Damien. The comment sections were filled with people calling me strong, brave, and inspiration. They called Camille a criminal and a gold digger. They called Damien a disgrace to medicine. Lisa Chen gave a tearful interview describing how Damien's negligence had killed her husband and how his lawyers had tried to blame David for his own death. Other victims came forward, patients who'd been overcharged, families who'd lost loved ones to questionable medical decisions, people who'd trusted Damien and been betrayed. A law firm announced they were filing a class action lawsuit against Damien, the clinic, and anyone else who could be held liable. I watched it all unfold from my office, surrounded by blueprints for a new civic center I was designing. The irony wasn't lost on me. While his world crumbled, mine was being rebuilt stronger than ever. New clients called daily, wanting to work with the woman who stood up for justice. My firm's revenue had increased 40% since the gala. Maya came home from school one day and hugged me tightly. "Mom, everyone at school is talking about you. They're saying you're a hero." I held her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, grateful that through all of this chaos, I still had what mattered most. He fell from grace like a stone from a tower, but the ground hadn't hit yet, and neither had my final revelation. While the FBI pursued their criminal investigation, Catherine began the civil asset review necessary for divorce proceedings. We needed a complete accounting of everything Damien and I owned together, every debt, every asset, every financial entanglement that would need to be unwound. I thought I'd seen the worst of his betrayal. I was wrong. Catherine called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon, her expression grave in a way I'd never seen before. She slid a folder across her mahogany desk without saying a word. Inside were loan documents, $450,000 borrowed against our joint accounts over the past 18 months. Loans I'd never seen, never signed, never even knew existed. "How is this possible?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never authorized these. Are you telling me he forged my signature?" Catherine shook her head slowly. "He didn't need to forge anything. Do you remember giving him power of attorney?" The memory hit me like cold water. 7 years ago, when I'd traveled to Dubai for a major project that required me to be overseas for 6 weeks. Damien had suggested I give him POA for emergency financial decisions, in case something needed to be paid, or if there was a medical emergency with Maya and he needed to access funds quickly. It had seemed reasonable, practical even, a gesture of trust between married partners. That power of attorney never expired, Aaliyah, Catherine explained. It's still legally valid, which means technically he had the authority to take out these loans. But using that authority for personal gain rather than legitimate marital purposes, that's civil fraud. We can fight it, but it's going to be complicated. My hands trembled as I opened the loan documents, studying the dates. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar, cross-referencing the dates with my own life. What I found made the room spin. The first loan, $200,000, had been taken out on March 15th, 18 months ago. I knew that date. I would never forget that date. It was the week Maya had been admitted to the hospital with pneumonia that had turned into a life-threatening infection. I'd spent 6 days sleeping in a chair beside her bed, watching her oxygen levels, listening to her labored breathing, praying to every god I could think of that my baby would survive. I'd been so terrified, so focused on keeping my daughter alive, that I hadn't checked our bank statements, hadn't thought about money, hadn't thought about anything except Maya's pale face against the hospital pillow. That was when Damien had made the down payment on Camille's condo. While I sat at our daughter's bedside, terrified she'd stop breathing, he'd used my legal authority to steal $200,000 to buy his mistress a home. The second loan, $150,000, was dated 6 weeks later during Maya's recovery period. She'd been home, but still weak, still requiring round-the-clock care. I'd taken a leave of absence from work to nurse her back to health, making her soup, administering medications, sleeping on the floor beside her bed in case she needed me. During those weeks, Damien had bought Camille a luxury car, furniture for her new condo, the jewelry she'd later flaunted on social media. The third loan, $100,000, had been taken out 3 months after that. I had no idea what that money had gone toward. Another woman, perhaps. More gifts for Camille. It didn't matter. The pattern was clear. He'd stolen nearly $500,000 during the most vulnerable, terrifying period of my life as a mother. While I'd prayed through the night that Maya would survive, he'd been planning his exit with his mistress, funding their affair with my money, using legal documents I'd signed out of trust and love. I couldn't breathe. Catherine pushed a glass of water toward me, but I couldn't lift it. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair anymore. It wasn't even about the patients he'd harmed or the fraud he'd committed. This was about choosing his mistress over his own daughter's life. This was about calculating cold-blooded theft during a family crisis. This was evil in a form I hadn't imagined him capable of. That afternoon, we filed an emergency legal separation motion, not a full divorce yet, which would take months, but a faster process to protect what remained of my assets. We requested an immediate freeze on all joint accounts, removal of Damien as any kind of stakeholder in Monroe Designs, and placement of the clinic property in receivership until the fraud investigation concluded. Catherine argued before Judge Richardson that I faced immediate financial harm if we didn't act fast. She presented the POA fraud, the criminal investigations, the frozen accounts, everything. The judge reviewed our evidence with the expression of disgust that gave me hope. "Motion granted," she said 48 hours later. "All joint accounts frozen. Mr. Monroe's interest in Monroe Designs is hereby terminated pending final divorce proceedings. The clinic property is placed under court-appointed receivership." Just like that, everything we'd built together was locked down. Damien was left with only his family inheritance trust, the money his father had left him, his personal car, and legal bills that were mounting into the hundreds of thousands. Everything else was either frozen or protected under my name. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt powerful. Instead, that night alone in the home I'd designed, I collapsed on my bedroom floor and sobbed until I thought my chest would crack open. Not from anger, from heartbreak, from the devastating realization that the man I'd loved, the father of my child, had chosen his mistress over our dying daughter, had stolen from me while I'd been at my most vulnerable, had calculated his betrayal down to the precise moments when I'd be too distracted by fear and love to notice. Maya found me there an hour later, still on the floor, my face swollen from crying. She lay down beside me without saying a word, wrapping her arms around me the way I'd held her in that hospital bed. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm so sorry he did this to you, to us." Every move they made was already in my blueprint, but winning felt like losing everything that once mattered. The trial began 2 months later in the height of summer in a federal courthouse that had become ground zero for a media circus unlike anything the city had seen. Every major news outlet had reporters camped outside. Protesters held signs, some supporting the victims, others bizarrely defending Damien, claiming he was being railroaded by a vindictive ex-wife. I attended every day of the 6-week trial, sitting in the gallery beside Lisa Chen and the other families, our silent presence a reminder of the real human cost behind the legal proceedings. The prosecution built their case methodically, calling forensic accountants who walked the jury through spreadsheets showing the systematic fraud. FBI agents testified about the evidence they'd uncovered: the fake invoices, the manipulated billing codes, the offshore accounts. Former clinic employees described how Camille had controlled the billing system and how Damien had pressured them to code procedures more aggressively. Patients took the stand holding medical bills for treatments they'd never received, their voices shaking with betrayal. But the most devastating testimony came from Lisa Chen. She wore a simple black dress and carried a folder of photographs. In a steady voice that occasionally cracked with grief, she described her husband David, a loving father, a youth soccer coach, a man who'd gone in for a routine procedure and never came home. She detailed how Damien had rushed through the catheterization, how he'd ignored warning signs, how David had coded on the table, while Damien made critical errors. Then she presented the original medical records that the hospital had kept compared to the falsified records Damien had submitted later. The differences were stark, undeniable, criminal. "He didn't just kill my husband," Lisa said, tears finally falling. "He tried to kill his memory by making it seem like David's fault, like his heart was too weak. But David's heart was strong. It was Dr. Monroe who was weak." I watched Damien throughout her testimony. He sat at the defense table in an expensive suit his family's money had bought, but he looked diminished, somehow smaller than I remembered. He kept his eyes down, unable to meet Lisa's gaze. Camille sat beside him at a separate defense table, her lawyer having argued for separate trials but lost. She wore conservative clothing, now her hair pulled back, trying to look innocent and victimized. It didn't work. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, the forewoman read the verdicts in a clear voice. Guilty on 14 counts for Damien insurance, fraud, medical malpractice, conspiracy, falsification of records. Guilty on 8 counts for Camille fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. The courtroom erupted. Damien's mother sobbed in the back row. Camille's face crumpled as she realized her calculated life plan had ended in federal prison. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd clearly been disgusted by the evidence, showed no mercy. Damien, 15 to 20 years in federal prison, $2 million in restitution to victims, medical license permanently revoked with no possibility of reinstatement. Camille, 8 to 12 years, full restitution of embezzled funds. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a profound emptiness. A week after sentencing, I agreed to do one exclusive interview, national television primetime, with a respected journalist known for tough but fair questions. I wore a navy suit and minimal jewelry, my grandmother's emerald ring the only flash of color. The studio lights were hot, the cameras intimidating, but I'd faced worse. "Mrs. Monroe," the interviewer began, "after everything you've been through, do you feel vindicated by these verdicts?" I paused, feeling unexpected tears prick my eyes. "I feel relieved that justice was served for the victims and their families. But I don't feel victorious. I married a man I thought had integrity, compassion, honor. Clearly I was wrong, and I don't know if that man ever existed or if I just built him in my imagination." "Do you forgive him?" My voice broke slightly, the emotion I'd been holding back for months finally cracking through. "I forgive the man I married, the one who wrote me love letters during his residency, who held my hand when my parents died, who cried when our daughter was born. But I don't know this person who stole and lied and destroyed lives. I don't know if I can forgive someone I never really knew." The clip went viral within hours, shared millions of times with comments praising my grace and dignity. I became an unlikely symbol not of revenge, but of a woman reclaiming her life after betrayal. Magazines wanted interviews. Women's groups invited me to speak. A publisher offered a book deal. The world saw me as strong, unbreakable, triumphant. But that night I came home to find Maya in her room with the door closed. She'd been increasingly distant over the past weeks, spending more time at friends' houses, less time talking to me. When I knocked, she told me to go away. "Maya, please," I said through the door. "Talk to me." Finally, she opened it, and the look on her face broke something in me. "You want to talk now, Mom? After months of acting like a robot, you never cried, not once in front of me. You just went to court every day with that perfect suit and that perfect face and that perfect control. You're so strong, everyone says. But you know what? I needed a mom, not a warrior. I needed you to be sad with me, to cry with me, to admit that this hurt. Her words hit me like physical blows. In my determination to be strong, to fight back, to protect us both, I'd forgotten that she was grieving too, that she'd lost her father not to death but to something worse, that she needed to see me be human, be vulnerable, be broken and healing, rather than just armored and untouchable. "I'm sorry," I whispered, but she'd already closed the door. That night, alone in my bedroom, I finally let myself completely shatter. I sobbed until my throat was raw, mourning, not just the marriage, but the decade I'd lost, the trust I'd given the family I'd thought we were. I cried for Maya, for the childhood innocence stolen by her father's choices. I cried for myself, for the woman who'd built everything and somehow still ended up alone. I'd won every battle in the courtroom, but I was losing the one person I went to war to protect my daughter. Maya and I started family therapy the week after our confrontation. It was slow, painful work, learning to communicate again, learning to let her see my vulnerability while still being the parent she needed. We were making progress, small steps toward rebuilding what had been damaged. Then 2 months after Damien's sentencing, his mother called. I almost didn't answer. Margaret Monroe and I had never been close. She'd always thought her son had married beneath him, that I wasn't quite good enough for her brilliant surgeon boy. But something made me pick up. "Aaliyah," she said, her voice trembling, "I know what Damien did is unforgivable. I know you have every right to hate him. But he's my son, and I'm watching him destroy himself. He's lost 30 pounds. He won't eat, won't sleep, won't see anyone. He just sits in that apartment staring at the walls, waiting for his prison transfer date. I'm terrified he's going to do something desperate." I felt nothing. No sympathy, no concern, just a cold emptiness where my feelings for Damien used to live. "That's not my problem anymore, Margaret." "I know," she whispered. "I just thought you should know." I hung up and went back to reviewing blueprints for a new project. But Maya had been standing in the doorway and she'd heard everything. "Mom," she said, her voice small and scared in a way I hadn't heard since she was little. "I know you hate him. I hate what he did too. But he's still my dad. If something happens to him and I never got to, I need to see him. Please." The next evening, Margaret called again. This time her voice was pure panic. "He took pills, a whole bottle of sleeping medication and half a bottle of whiskey. I found him on the bathroom floor. The ambulance is taking him to Mercy General. He's still breathing, but barely." The news broke within hours. Social media erupted with speculation. Some blamed me, claiming I'd driven him to it with my ruthless pursuit of justice. Others defended me, saying he'd made his own choices. Maya saw the posts at school, came home in tears, begging me to take her to the hospital. I called my therapist first. "Your compassion doesn't erase your right to justice," she reminded me. "You don't owe him anything, but you do owe Maya the chance to say goodbye to the father she thought she had." We went to the hospital that night. The ICU was quiet, except for the beeping of monitors and the whisper of ventilators. Damien was in a private room, his stomach pumped, IV lines running into both arms. He looked like a ghost of himself, gaunt, pale, broken, in ways that went beyond the physical. Maya stayed in the waiting room while I went in alone. When Damien's eyes focused on me, something flickered there, shame maybe, or desperate hope. "You won," he said, his voice hoarse from the intubation tube they'd removed hours earlier. "I'm completely destroyed. Does it feel good?" "No," I said, my voice flat and cold. "And that's how I know I'm still human." He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover what I did to you. To Maya, to all those people." "You're not sorry you did it," I said. "You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference, Damien." He broke down then, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. "I destroyed everything good in my life, everything that mattered. I don't know how to live with what I've done." "That's the point," I said quietly. "You have to live with it. You have to face it, survive it, carry it. You don't get to escape through pills or alcohol or death. You owe those families, Lisa Chen and her children, all the patients you harmed. You owe them your suffering. Your regret, your very long life of knowing what you did. I turned to leave my hand on the door handle when his voice stopped me. Will you ever forgive me? I paused, not turning around. I'm working on forgiving myself for not seeing who you were sooner. That's all the forgiveness I have energy for right now. I walked out without looking back past the nurse's station to where Maya sat clutching a tissue. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Is he going to be okay? She asked. Physically, yes, I said. Everything else, that's going to take a very long time. We drove home in silence. That night, lying in bed, I realized something fundamental had shifted. Damien had wanted my forgiveness, my absolution, my permission to feel less guilty about his choices. But I wanted peace, the kind that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, protected the people who mattered, and refused to let someone else's destruction become your burden. He wanted my forgiveness. I wanted my peace. Only one of us would get what we needed, and it wouldn't be him. After Damien's hospitalization, I realized I couldn't keep operating the way I had been. I'd spent a year in what my therapist called survival mode, moving from one crisis to the next, armored and strategic, never stopping long enough to actually process what had happened to me. I committed to weekly therapy sessions, blocking out every Thursday afternoon, regardless of client meetings or deadlines. At first, I treated it like another task to check off my list, but gradually, Dr. Patricia Green broke through my defenses. You didn't just lose a marriage, she said during one session. You lost your identity as the woman who fixes everything, the woman who builds. For 10 years, you were his foundation. When did you become your own? The question shattered something inside me. I'd spent so long being strong for Damien, for Maya, for my business, for the victims seeking justice, that I'd forgotten how to simply be Aaliyah. Not Aaliyah the architect, not Aaliyah the betrayed wife, not Aaliyah the warrior. Just Aaliyah, the woman who used to paint watercolors on Sunday mornings, who loved hiking mountain trails, who laughed easily and loved deeply. Dr. Green suggested journaling. I started writing every night before bed, pouring out thoughts I'd never spoken aloud. Slowly, I began reconnecting with parts of myself I'd abandoned. I bought painting supplies and set up an easel in my home office. I joined a weekend hiking group. I let myself smile at small things. A perfect cup of coffee, autumn leaves, Maya's terrible jokes, and mean it. The breakthrough came 3 months into therapy. Dr. Green asked me to write a letter to my 25-year-old self, the woman who'd fallen in love with Damien all those years ago. I sat at my desk for an hour, pen hovering over paper before the words finally came. Dear younger me, you deserved so much better than what he gave you. But you were never weak. You were full of hope, full of dreams, full of the kind of love that builds worlds. That hope wasn't wasted. It just needed a better home. And now, you're building that home brick by brick, day by day, for yourself. I cried when I finished writing, but they were different tears than before. Not bitter, not angry, just sad for the time lost, and grateful for the strength found. One Sunday morning, I found myself driving to St. Catherine's, the small stone church where Damien and I had gotten married 15 years ago. I hadn't been back since the divorce proceedings began, couldn't bear the memories, the betrayal of promises made at that altar. But something pulled me there that morning. The sanctuary was empty, light streaming through stained glass windows, dust motes dancing in the colored beams. I sat in the back pew, memories washing over me our wedding day. Maya's baptism, Christmas services where we'd sung carols and pretended to be the perfect family. I walked to the altar where we'd exchanged vows, and the weight of everything finally overwhelmed me. I sank to my knees and broke down. God, I whispered through tears, I won. I got justice. Why do I feel like I lost everything? Because winning isn't always what we think it is, a gentle voice said behind me. I turned to find Father Michael, the elderly pastor who'd married us, sitting in the front pew. He must have been in his office and heard me crying. He walked over slowly, his kind eyes understanding, and sat beside me on the floor, despite his age. We talked for 3 hours. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He just listened and then shared his own wisdom. Winning isn't about destroying your enemy, Aaliyah. It's about not letting them destroy you. And from where I'm sitting, you're still standing. That's the real victory. I started attending services again after that, finding comfort in the ritual and community. I joined a support group for divorced women that met in the church basement every Tuesday evening. Hearing their stories, sharing mine, realizing I wasn't alone in this particular devastation, it helped more than I'd expected. Faith didn't erase my pain, but it gave me a framework for processing it, for believing that healing was possible. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived with a prison postmark, Camille's handwriting. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened, but curiosity won. I sat at my kitchen table and read words I never expected. Mrs. Monroe, I know you hate me. I hate myself. You were right at the trial. I was in this for business, not love. I targeted your husband, like I targeted others before him. I'm a terrible person who destroyed lives for money, and now I'm paying the price. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that watching you throughout the trial, seeing your dignity and strength, showed me what real power looks like. I hope someday, after I've served my time and done the work, I can be half the woman you are. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to forgive, might never be ready. But keeping the letter felt important somehow, a reminder that even villains are human, that people can recognize their own darkness, even if they can't undo the damage they've caused. My therapist called it growth when I told her, "You're not excusing what she did. You're just acknowledging her humanity without sacrificing your own healing." Pain taught me patience, I wrote in my journal that night. Power taught me peace. I was finally healing, and then the last person I expected to hear from knocked on my door. The knock on my door came on a Thursday evening, 15 months after the anniversary gala that had ended my marriage. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the security camera before answering. A courier stood there holding an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on plain paper, the penmanship shaky but recognizable. Damien had been released on parole after serving 10 months of his sentence. Good behavior. Full payment of his portion of restitution from his family inheritance, participation in prison education programs, all had earned him early release. The letter explained that he was working as a medical equipment salesman, now barred permanently from practicing medicine. He was living in a modest apartment across town, attending therapy twice a week, and working the 12-step program. He asked if I would meet him just once so he could apologize properly. He promised it would be brief on my terms wherever I felt comfortable. My first instinct was to tear up the letter and forget it existed. I'd moved on, was healing, didn't need to revisit that pain. But I brought it to Dr. Green during our next session. "Closure isn't for him," she said after reading it. "It's for you. You can meet him and still maintain every boundary you've established. You can hear what he has to say and walk away on your own terms. Sometimes seeing the person who hurt us in their diminished state helps us realize how much power we've reclaimed." I thought about it for 3 days before responding. I agreed to meet, but only on my conditions: Riverside Park, the place where we'd had our first date 17 years ago. 30 minutes maximum, public location. Maya could come if she wanted. When I told Maya about the meeting, she looked at me with those wise eyes that seemed too old for 16. "This is between you two, Mom. I said everything I needed to say to him during the prison visit last month. This is your closure, not mine." That Saturday afternoon was unseasonably warm for late autumn, the kind of day where the sun feels like a gift. I arrived at the park 10 minutes early, sat on a bench near the pond where Damien and I had once fed ducks, and talked about our dreams. The memory felt like it belonged to different people. He arrived exactly on time, and I barely recognized him. He'd lost significant weight, his expensive clothes replaced with off-the-rack slacks and a simple button-down shirt. His hair had gone mostly gray. He walked with a hesitancy I'd never seen in him before, like someone who'd learned not to take up too much space in the world. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting on the far end of the bench, maintaining careful distance. "I know I don't deserve even this." "You don't," I said, my voice steady and calm, "but I needed to see you sober and honest, if that's even possible for you anymore." He nodded, accepting the barb without defensiveness. I've been in therapy twice a week since before sentencing, working through the 12 steps with a sponsor. I'm on step 9, making amends to those I've harmed. You're at the top of a very long list. The awkward silence stretched between us. A family walked past with a golden retriever, children laughing. Normal life continuing around our abnormal conversation. I destroyed our family. Damien finally said, his voice thick with emotion. I destroyed your trust, my career, my integrity. I stole from you while our daughter was fighting for her life in a hospital bed. I chose a woman who was using me over the wife who'd built everything I had. There's no excuse for any of it. I was selfish, arrogant, cruel, and blind. I'm deeply, truly sorry for every single thing I did to you. I listened, watching him carefully. There was something different in his eyes now, genuine remorse maybe, or at least the recognition of what he'd lost. I appreciate you saying that, I said slowly. I do. But apologies don't rebuild trust, Damien. They don't give me back 10 years. They don't undo the trauma you caused Maya. They don't bring back David Chen or heal the patients you defrauded. I know, he whispered. I'm not asking for forgiveness or friendship or anything from you. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I destroyed, what I threw away, what I'll never get back. I took a deep breath, feeling the autumn sun on my face, gathering my thoughts for what I needed to say. Can I tell you what I learned through all of this? You were never my partner, Damien. You were my project. I built you up, funded your dreams, designed your success, supported your ambitions. And somewhere deep down, you resented me for it. You couldn't handle being the weaker one, being the one who needed help. That's why you chose Camille, because she made you feel powerful and needed, not indebted and inadequate. He flinched like I'd struck him, tears streaming down his face. You're right. God, you're absolutely right. I couldn't handle that you were stronger than me, smarter than me, more successful than me. My ego couldn't take being built by you instead of building myself. I stood up, smoothing my jacket, preparing to leave. Goodbye, Damien. I genuinely hope you find peace. Real peace, not the kind that requires tearing down others to make yourself feel bigger. He looked up at me, his face wet with tears, and for the first time I saw actual understanding in his eyes. Not self-pity, not manipulation, just the devastating recognition of everything he'd lost and could never reclaim. I walked away from that bench with my head high, my steps steady, feeling lighter than I had in months. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That was the last time I saw the man I married because I was finally ready to meet the woman I'd become. 2 months after my final meeting with Damien, I stood in front of a building I'd designed 5 years earlier, a 3-story structure with clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that had originally housed one of Monroe Design's satellite offices. Now it had been transformed into something far more meaningful. The Monroe Foundation headquarters gleamed in the spring sunshine, its entrance decorated with banners reading, "Women Building Futures," and "Architects of Our Own Destiny." 500 people filled the lobby and spilled out onto the landscaped courtyard for the grand opening. Politicians I'd lobbied for, funding celebrities who'd donated to the cause, business leaders who'd signed on as mentors, and most importantly, the women themselves, survivors of divorce, domestic violence, financial abuse, all gathered to celebrate what we'd built together. The Foundation's mission was simple: provide scholarships, business mentorship, and financial literacy programs for women rebuilding their lives after devastating circumstances. First-year funding had reached $5 million, enough to support 50 women with comprehensive programs. The ceremony began with testimonials from 3 women whose lives had been transformed. Sarah, who'd left an abusive marriage with nothing and now owned a thriving bakery. Jennifer, who'd put herself through nursing school with our scholarship after her husband abandoned her and their 4 children. Maria, who'd launched a successful consulting firm after we'd connected her with a mentor in her industry. Each story was different, but the thread was the same. They'd been knocked down, but they'd gotten back up. They'd rebuilt. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium feeling the weight of every woman's eyes on me, not with judgment, but with understanding, with recognition. I built buildings my whole life. I began my voice steady and clear. I created spaces where people could live, work, and dream. But 2 years ago, I had to learn to build something much harder myself. And you know what I discovered? The same principles apply. You need a strong foundation. You need a clear vision of what you're creating. You need patience through the construction process because nothing worthwhile gets built overnight. And you need to know that sometimes you have to tear down the old structure completely before you can build something new and better. I paused, looking out at the faces before me. Every woman here is an architect of her own destiny. You're not victims of your circumstances. You're builders, creators, survivors who refuse to stay broken. And this foundation exists to give you the tools, the resources, and the support to design the life you deserve. The applause was thunderous, but then something unexpected happened. Maya stepped onto the stage, and I hadn't known she'd planned this. She was 17 now, confident and poised in ways that reminded me of myself at that age, before life had taught me hard lessons about trust. "I wasn't supposed to speak today," Maya said into the microphone, her voice wavering slightly with emotion. "But Mom doesn't know this, so surprise." As she looked at me, tears already forming in her eyes. 2 years ago, I watched my world crumble when my dad betrayed my mom at what should have been their celebration. I was so angry at him for destroying our family, and honestly at my mom for being what I thought was too strong, too controlled, too unwilling to just break down and cry with me. My own tears started falling as I listened to my daughter speak. "But now I understand something I was too young and hurt to see then," Maya continued. "Mom wasn't cold. She was protecting me while fighting the hardest battle of her life. She was showing me what real strength looks like, not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain define you. Mom, you didn't just rebuild your life. You showed me how to build mine. You taught me that being strong doesn't mean being perfect or unbreakable. It means getting up every single day and choosing yourself, choosing growth, choosing to build something beautiful from the ruins. I'm so proud to be your daughter." She stepped away from the microphone, and we met in the middle of the stage holding each other while we both cried. The audience rose in a standing ovation, but all I could feel was my daughter's arms around me. Her whispered, "I love you, Mom," in my ear, and the healing of a bond I'd been terrified I'd broken forever. After the ceremony, I led small groups on tours of the facility classrooms for financial literacy workshops, computer labs for job training, conference rooms for mentorship meetings, even a childcare center so mothers could attend programs without worrying about their children. As I walked through the registration area, I saw a familiar face at the volunteer desk helping women sign up for services. Camille looked different. Her hair was shorter, simpler. No makeup, no designer clothes, just a plain blouse and slacks. She'd been released from prison 3 weeks earlier after serving her full sentence. When our eyes met, the room seemed to hold its breath. People stopped talking, watching to see what would happen. Camille didn't smile or try to approach. She simply mouthed 3 words, "Thank you for this." I could have walked past, could have ignored her, could have asked security to remove her. Instead, I walked slowly toward the desk, aware of everyone watching. Serena tensed beside me, ready to intervene if needed. I stopped in front of Camille and extended my hand. "Make sure these women get the support I didn't have when I needed it most." Camille's eyes filled with tears as she shook my hand. "I will, every single day, I promise." There was no hug, no declaration of friendship, no absolution of her crimes. Just an acknowledgement that we were both human, both flawed, and both capable of choosing differently going forward. As I walked away, Serena leaned close and whispered, "How do you feel?" I took a deep breath, feeling something lift from my chest that I'd been carrying for 2 years. Free. Forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was the final act of power, and I was ready to wield it on my own terms. 6 months after the foundation launch, I stood in my custom-designed penthouse, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber. Every building visible from my floor-to-ceiling windows contained my architectural work: the concert hall, with its distinctive curved roof, the medical center I'd designed, ironically enough, the boutique hotel that had launched my career, the civic center that had just won a National Design Award. This view was a testament to everything I'd created, but it was the life I'd rebuilt that mattered most. I wore comfortable linen pajamas and padded barefoot to my balcony garden, a new hobby I'd discovered in therapy. Watering my herbs and flowers each morning had become a meditation, a way to start each day grounded in the present rather than haunted by the past. The basil was flourishing, the lavender releasing its calming scent into the morning air. Simple pleasures that I'd never allowed myself time for during those years of building everyone else's dreams. People still ask me sometimes, usually with that concerned tilt of their head, whether I regretted marrying Damien. My answer had evolved over these 2 years. I regretted losing myself in the process of loving him, of making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. But I didn't regret finding myself again on the other side of that devastation. The rebuild I'd learned is always stronger than the original. You know where the weak points are. You know what materials can withstand the storms. You know your own strength in ways you never could have before. The doorbell chimed, interrupting my morning peace. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, a delivery person stood holding the most magnificent bouquet of wildflowers I'd ever seen: purple asters, golden black-eyed Susans, white Queen Anne's lace, all arranged in beautiful chaos. I tipped the delivery person and carried the arrangement inside, expecting a card from a client or business partner congratulating me on some recent success. Instead, the card was in Maya's handwriting, and my eyes filled with tears as I read, "Mom, I'm so proud of everything you've built, the buildings that shape our city, the foundation that's changing lives, and most importantly, yourself. Let's have dinner tonight, just us. I can't wait to tell you about my college plans. Love you to the moon and back. P.S. I want to study architecture like you." I had to sit down, the card clutched in my hand, tears streaming down my face. But these were tears of pure joy, of a victory more profound than any courtroom verdict or business success. My daughter wanted to follow in my footsteps, not because I'd pressured her, but because I'd shown her what it meant to build, to create, to design your own destiny. The legacy I was most proud of wasn't any building. It was the strength and resilience I'd modeled for her through the hardest years of both our lives. After calling Maya to confirm dinner plans and hearing the excitement in her voice about architecture programs she was considering, I walked to my home office and sat at the desk positioned to overlook the city I'd helped shape. I opened my leather journal, the one I'd been writing in throughout this entire journey, and turned to a fresh page for what I knew would be my final entry in this chapter. Dear future me. I wrote, my hand steady and sure. He proposed to his mistress at our anniversary. I proposed to my future, and she said yes every single day since. I built these buildings that pierce the sky. I rebuilt my life from ruins. Turns out the same blueprint applies to both. Start with an unbreakable foundation. Maintain a clear vision. Even when the path gets dark, have patience through the storms, because nothing worthwhile gets built overnight, and possess the courage to know when to tear down what no longer serves you and when to build up what does. I am the architect of my own destiny, not his victim, not his foundation, not his project. My own builder, my own designer, my own creation, and the blueprint for what comes next, it's just beginning. I closed the journal and set down my pen, then turned to look out at the city bathed in morning light. The skyline I'd helped design stretched before me, each building a testament to vision and perseverance. But the real masterpiece wasn't made of steel and glass. It was the woman reflected in that window, strong, peaceful, powerful, and finally completely her own. They tried to break me at that anniversary gala 2 years ago in front of everyone I knew in the most humiliating way possible. Instead, they freed me from a life built on false foundations. And that freedom, it built an empire not just of buildings and businesses, but of purpose, peace, and the unshakable knowledge that I could survive anything and emerge stronger. I smiled at my reflection at the woman I'd become and whispered to myself what I now knew to be the truest thing I'd ever learned. You are not defined by who broke you, but by what you built after. And that's Aaliyah's story, a woman who transformed the worst betrayal of her life into the greatest comeback. From that devastating anniversary proposal to building an empire that helps other women rise from their own ruins, she proved that the end of one chapter can be the beginning of something far more powerful. What do you think about Aaliyah's journey? Was her revenge justified, or did she go too far? And what about that final moment with Camille at the foundation? Would you have been able to extend that hand of acknowledgement? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your perspectives on these incredible stories. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in the power of rebuilding yourself, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of strength, justice, and transformation. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's going through their own storm and needs a reminder that survival is possible and thriving is even better. Remember, you're not defined by who broke you. You're defined by what you build after. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.